Hi all, let's look at another mega clash in the London Chess Classic. This is from round 4. Hikaru Nakamura, the USA number 1, 2793, is playing Vishy Anand, former world chess champion, 2803. He kicks off with d4. Vishy Anand plays knight f6. We enter into, shortly, a Catalan, so characterized by this bishop fianchettoing, putting pressure along the diagonal, and black's d5 pawn will be the first target. Bishop e7, bishop g2, black castled. Now often players actually ignore the c pawn here, and they often castle. We're talking nearly 10,000 games with castling, and games often continue, for example like this, where there's a tempo gain sometimes on the queen, and black fianchettos and tries to sort out most of his problems, but there's still the c5 break to try and get in. So games often go like that, but in this game we see a much rarer queen c2 here, which has been played nearly 1,000 times, so immediately protecting that pawn. It seems a more comfortable thing to do intuitively in many respects. We see now an aggressive looking c5, as though black's playing this in Tarrasch defense style. This central tension here, we see white ignoring this central tension for the moment, and black now takes on d4. This creates a loose piece temporarily after knight takes d4. Slightly loose piece, and black actually hits that with queen b6. It's protected, and now knight c6. Now here in live book there's 7 games with knight takes c6. It seems players don't like retreating the knight, perhaps too passive. It's just taken on c6, letting black, usually black takes towards the center. This is like 12 games in live book. The most popular response, it seems logical, take towards the center. But here we see queen takes c6. And actually it seems as though Vishy Anand had played this in blitz against Levon Aronian earlier in the year and won actually an interesting game. There's different tries for white, a4, b3, knight a3, but Nakamura ignores those tries, those main tries. He plays actually bishop g5, which has a curious logic to it, and it seems perfectly reasonable. Just for those interested, the Aronian Anand game in Stavanger 2015 went with knight a3 here, and so bishop takes, and then taking here. It seems materialistic, but this seemed to work quite well for black. Here an exchange sack, and black had 2 connected passed pawns. It's a blitz game though, and managed to win against Levon Aronian playing white. So that's very interesting. So knight a3, it has been seen before by Vishy just earlier this year. But this bishop g5, yes, it has some venom. If black takes on c4, you might think, can black afford to do it here? Well, white can actually take that, and after knight d2, this bishop's very, very comfortable on the diagonal. And how is black defending this pawn? White's going to be very comfortable in this sort of position, and easy access to the d file. White's pieces are just looking very nice. So in fact, after bishop g5, no, not taking this pawn, we see h6, encouraging white to give up the dark square bishop. And you might think, well, isn't this a trump card for black, this dark square bishop? The thing is, yeah, there's more pressure on d5 simply. There's a pin against the pawn. And now this knight a3 move protects c4. Okay, so what to do about the pressure on d5? Bishop d7. We see rook ab1. Which protects this pawn, which means actually c takes, and this knight takes will be useful to win d5 soon. We see rook ac8 pinning down this pawn to c2, unpinning with queen d3. The unpinning moves are tactical moves as well in a way, when you pin or unpin. So queen d3, and it's also pinning as well 2 ways. This pawn, the diagonal ends against the bishop on d7. So this d5 seems to be a sitting target. In compensation, black obviously has the bishop pair, and this knight looks a little bit drunken on the side here, a drunken knight. Rook fd8, c takes d5, and here it's representing a pawn sack, obviously, This is now officially a gambit, actually, after rook fd8. It's officially gambit territory. So black's still got the bishop pair, and there's the awkward knight on a3. We have c takes d5, queen a4. So it's officially a gambit. Now, the immediate pitfall for white is if d takes, after this move, it's looking at d1. So this would be a catastrophe move after bishop takes e6. Because how is the queen actually protecting the rook? Whole rook's dropping off. So that's a no to take on e6 here. So there's compensation pressure. There's the bishop pair. And it seems a little bit awkward, the d5 pawn. We see rook d2. And black continues now to kind of shut down a bit more the options with b5. It would seem potentially useful to also be playing b4 soon. Whereas the knight going after b4, it hasn't got necessarily all the time this move, because there might even be bishop b5. So this next move does actually usefully vacate b1. In the event of b4, there's an extra option for the knight, which might be useful to consider here. But black actually didn't play b4, and this might actually be a little bit of a mistake. Black actually played e takes d5. Potentially interesting in this position is just a6 to say to white, what are you doing with this pawn? Because the bishop's reinforced d8 here. If we look at this position, it seems black, say d6, rook c5. This pawn could be potentially weak. The knight's still shut out of the game. Black still has the bishop pair. If this pawn is not going to be a dangerous pass pawn, then black might be able to hold the balance. But it seems, Vishy played e takes d5. This might be a little mistake. It seems as though it's doing white a favour. Now, before we look at e takes d5, let's just check the sharper b4 forcing move for those interested here. It seems as that actually knight c4 previously mentioned is actually playable. You don't want to do this, I think, actually, because queen takes a2. Yeah, so knight c4 going into a pin. Actually, this might be okay after b3. So that's fine, it seems, for white. This variation here. And in fact, there's a tactical idea, queen takes c4, because we're on the queen here. And white could end up with a fine position here. So it seems b4, although it's interesting, e takes d5 was played. The engine suggestion is actually a6 here, just a6, with a minimal advantage for white, and actually not playing d takes, because this actually again leads white into trouble. Look at the raking bishops in this position. Full compensation, actually soon to be getting a pawn back, I suspect, because of the dark square pressure. So white has to be careful. He's still got that drunken knight, doesn't want the glare of these bishops like this. No, don't want this. So anyway, yeah, a6 is the engine move to try and hold the position. But we see e takes after bishop takes d5. Bishop c6, white just reinforces, very naturally it seems to me, the d5 bishop. a6 now. Now restrictive move h4, shutting out options of bishop g5, which might have been a useful forcing move at some point. Bishop takes, e takes, and here we see queen b4. Okay, looking at b2, and yeah, Nakamura plays what looks to be a passive looking move, rook b1, and you might think after this sort of move, is white really playing for a win? He is a pawn up. What he needs to do is improve his worst piece, which is this a3 knight. It so happens he's got c2 guarded now, and the queen's not even looking at a2 now. So this knight c2 to e3 or to d4 potentially will be a useful rerouting of the worst placed piece, the knight. Queen a5, still kind of pinning the knight to a2. We see now a forcing move here, b4. And perhaps Vishy should have played queen b6. I think he said in an interview after that, maybe he should have just retreated the queen. Because on a4, it could be a bit stuck there. Queen b6, this position, aiming for a blockade, seems perfectly, it's stable. and about half a pawn's advantage for white, but it's stable, or even less from an engine perspective. That would be a stable position. But here we seem to be getting a little bit adventurous with the queen after queen a4. Little bit adventurous. And we see now rook b3. Although this is a targetable knight, seemingly silly, knight on the rim is dim, it's encouraging dimness from black. This queen on a4 does not look happy. It's stuck there. Bishop e7. Okay, we have rook e2, saying to black, fine, take this pawn and see what happens. But Vishy played rook c7. If he did take this pawn, then there's going to be more than one dim looking piece here after rook e4 pinning the bishop to the queen. After a5, this just looks really weird for black to want to do this. Say king g2, this sort of position, white's going to progress with d6. Black seems to be in an incredibly awkward place here. After queen takes b5, the advantage is with white. So yeah, that pawn shouldn't really be taken because it just goes into this other pin basically. Rook c7. And now king g2, taking the king off the dark squares is a good prophylaxis principle. If the opponent's only got a certain colour of bishop, take your king off generally if you want to avoid tactical issues. Bishop f6, queen f3, because black's not really doing that much with the queen stuck here on a4. Rook e7, rook d2, as though d6 might be on the cards. Rook ed7, stopping d6 it seems. Queen e2, and it seems with queen e2 that there's an idea potentially for knight c2 to let the queen out to take here and then play knight d4 because the queen's actually protecting d2. So in fact in that scenario both rooks would be protected and we get in that knight d4, we get a centralized knight from a dim knight. Off the g6 though, it seems Nakamura's got another intention for the knight, not just d4, but he's got another fantastic rerouting intention, not like that. He's got a rerouting intention, believe it or not, like this. And I think, well, f5's covered. His first move is actually h5. So that is actually a dual purpose move. It wasn't just restricting bishop g5. He's going to damage black's king safety if something is not done about g6. And black plays the compromising move g5, weakening f5. So this leads to the idea if a knight can get to f5, Kasparov's favourite place for a knight, then obviously how do we accelerate that? We can use a positional pawn sacrifice, potentially. This knight's just wanting to go to f5. It would be a very lucrative destination in this position. We see queen d1. Also, it does seem possible from an engine perspective, although not as aesthetically pleasing, I would say, to just play this and then the aforementioned knight d4 hitting the queen with both rooks protected. This position is already, this is an advantage for white, that's trapping the queen there. And if queen a1, knight c6 is an advantage for white here. This kind of position is like winning the exchange. This is a nasty position for black to be in here. If rook d6, yeah, we can play rook a2, take that exchange. If the rook moves here, let's ask the obvious question about the rook moving. Let's just check that one out. That's one I should have really shown you. Okay, rook f8, rook a2. We can kick the queen around, potentially usefully rook f3. This position already shows actually white's, you know, this knight is unpleasant there. But yeah, as I say, Nakamura's got other intentions for the knight for the moment. Queen d1. This supports the idea that it's actually covering the back row. So knight c2 to e3 to f5 looks really tempting as a maneuver. Now bishop g2, knight c2, threatening to trap the queen, by the way. So something has to be done about rook a3. It's going to checkmate the queen. We see queen takes a2, and now with tempo, knight e3 hitting the queen, protecting the rook. The knight's heading for f5. It's all coming together here. Queen a1, Nakamura's forcing an exchange of queens basically with his queen on d1. He can take there. Gaining a tempo, forking the bishop on a1 with the pawn on a6, with the knight now holding d5. Bishop d4, a very tactical response. Knight f5, hitting the bishop and saying to black, if you dare take on d5, then there's knight e7 check. So that pawn is indirectly defended here because of the resource knight e7. So the bishop goes back, dropping a6. White's fully in the driving seat here. Look at the two rooks, they're more active than the knight, beautifully placed on f5. Just a few moments ago the knight was on a3, and now look at it. Wow, that knight is glorious on f5. Bishop f8, we see d6. Another tactical idea, the bishop is overloaded. Although it seems to be attacking d6, it has to defend h6 surely. But if black doesn't do anything here, white's just surely going to reinforce d6 and just walk his king across at leisure at some point. Just get the king even to d5 to c6 maybe later. So black takes on d6 and we see knight takes h6 check, which kind of weakens g5. King h7. Knight g4 now, threatening knight f6 check. This is a very unpleasant position for Vishy Anand. He's a pawn down and he's faced with very, very unpleasant threats. In fact, he resigned here. Let's have a look at this final position. What can black do here? Let's say king g7 as an example. Then something like this, black has to be careful. No king here because of knight f6. So king here, rook f3. And white's going to be building up the pressure. Rook f5. What about this g5 now? If we try and defend, knight f6 forks the rooks. So yeah, what to do about g5? It can just be taken. It's just horrible. It's just horrible, horrible position. So that was one example of the knight g4. We saw that was an example of king g7. Let's say bishop e7. Rook f3 is really annoying, using this rook, hitting f7, stopping any f5 as well, of course. And if rook f8, knight e5, forking f7 and d7. If the rook moves, white can actually safely take that. The king's protecting f3. We're now threatening potentially knight takes g5 to win f8. That's one of the threats here. What does black do here? Say g4. It's just relentless pressure here. Black can never use this pin really. This is just horrible. If king g7, we can even throw in rook g6 check to kick the king back. Then knight g5 is possible even, because the pawn's holding the rook. It's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous, this position. Black will be losing b5 in this line. So instead of bishop e7, just to satisfy our curiosity, so we've seen bishop e7, king g7. What about rook e7? It's just a very awkward looking position. Goes into a nasty pin. If black tries to unpin, we can take here, simplify. Rook d6 is nice as an example. And if the bishop moves now, rook d5 double attacks these two loose pawns. So white will win yet another pawn. It's just pure torture. Why would someone want to be tortured like this for hours on end? And if there's a counter attack here, then the king can actually step out, and this position is again going into this fork. So it seems black is faced with an inevitable loss of further pawns basically in the final position. We've seen quite a few candidate moves. One we haven't looked at just yet is king h8. Again, rook f3 is just a nifty move here, to get to rook f5 to fork these two loose pawns. b5 is a constant target as well, so that's one of the threats here. If bishop takes, as an example, knight e5, and this is going to be forking on f7. If the rook moves, knight takes f7, we're going to win an exchange or the rook, so black has to set the exchange. So that's just absolutely miserable. Black's losing the exchange if bishop takes b4. And if he doesn't play bishop b4 here, as I say, the threat is rook f5. So say king g7, rook f5 still. This is just horrible. Yeah, white can do all sorts of things. I think should be able to just safely take the b5 pawn even here. So yeah, what do we say about this game? Interesting game. It seems as though Nakamura made it look kind of easy, but the fact is, before we say, oh, this is an unsound pawn gambit from Vishy Anand, he did have the bishop pair. There was a terrible looking knight on a3. I think something was not quite right about the exploitation of the knight on a3. In particular, to me, queen a4 was just asking for a bit of trouble. The pieces were a bit stuck. Not just the knight, it attracted like a magnet. The queen, very expensive queen, to a4. It was stuck there. Maybe black should have been content with a dark square blockade and try and hold the position instead of getting that fully entrenched queen. The move h5 was really quite nasty, opening up f5 for a brilliant career prospect for the knight rerouting to f5. And that's a really dangerous position. And black also having these weak pawns on both sides of the board doesn't help in the final scenario. Of course, it's all run beautiful, with beautiful tactics, with the knight and forking in various places and variations. So beautifully executed from a tactical perspective, all the ideas. So Nakamura making it look simple to do all these maneuvers, but really, what a high precision performance behind the scenes. It seems, to fully get out of this position where the knight was seemingly really unpleasant on a3, getting it to a beautiful location, and willing to sacrifice the d-pawn. Some players might have been hesitant, but sacking the d-pawn for other advantages, conversion of one advantage into other advantages. So I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.